Hello everyone, this is Ruslan Bailov. Today we'll break down the results of the past 24 hours on the front line, as well as go over the current political agenda, which frankly speaking is becoming increasingly action-packed and unpredictable. February is coming to its logical conclusion, and the last days of the month have brought truly outstanding results in terms of the advance of the Russian armed forces. To give you a full understanding of the scale of what is happening, over the past 24 hours alone, more than 50 square kilometers of territory have come under the control of the Russian army. This is not just a good result, it is a record figure for the whole of February, and, as I will mention later, one of the best figures recently in general. But before we proceed to a detailed breakdown of the situation on the map and by direction, I want to address those of you watching us for the first time or who have been putting off subscribing. If you regularly follow our episodes, if these reports help you understand what is happening on the front, please subscribe to the channel. Subscribing is the main tool of support that helps the channel grow, reach a larger audience, and continue working on a daily basis. Comments are also important. They signal to the algorithm that the content is in demand. But it is the subscription that has the greatest impact on development. To everyone who has already subscribed, my sincere gratitude. Let's begin. The Vostok East Group breakthrough in the Zaporozhye direction. The key event of the past 24 hours was undoubtedly the large-scale advance of the Vostok Group units in the western direction. We are talking about 8 kilometers in depth. And this is not a planned positional advance, but a genuine operational breakthrough that could have far-reaching consequences for the entire Zaporozhye sector of the front. During the offensive, the fighters of the Vostok Group returned the settlement of Pridorozhnoye under Russian control and established firm control over the large village of Rozhdestvenskoye. The capture of Rozhdestvenskoye itself is important for a number of reasons, and I want to dwell on this in detail because many may not fully understand the strategic significance of what happened. First, Rozhdestvenskoye is a large settlement that can be used as a base for the accumulation and deployment of personnel and equipment. From here, movement is possible in both western and southern directions, meaning it is a kind of strategic hub, control over which opens up several vectors for the further development of the offensive at once. Second, and this is fundamentally important, it is exactly through the line of the villages Rozhdestvenskoye, Vozdvijenka, Verkhnyaya Tersa that the new defense line of the Ukrainian armed forces runs. Now that Rozhdestvenskoye is controlled by the Russian army, the entire southern section of this defensive line is under the direct threat of collapse. The logic is simple. If the northern anchor point of the line is taken, the flanking pressure on all other positions increases exponentially. It becomes increasingly difficult to hold them, and the loss of one position triggers a chain reaction. Third, and this is already at the operational strategic level, there is no serious defense line for the next 13 kilometers. It is literally open space right up to the Nikolskoye, Omelnik line, and if the Russian army reaches Omelnik, this will mean a virtual death sentence for the Ukrainian grouping in Orekhov. Why? Because this allows for a maneuver into the rear of the Ukrainian armed forces positions in Orekhov, and under such a scenario, holding the city becomes simply impossible from a military operational point of view. This is not an exaggeration or propaganda. It is pure tactical logic. Now for the numbers. The advance is 8 kilometers deep. 2 settlements have been taken under control. The area of territory that has come under Russian control in this sector alone is over 35 square kilometers. But that's not all for the Vostok Group's zone of responsibility. Further south, from Zalizhnye, Russian units continue to move towards another strategically significant settlement, the urban-type settlement of Gulyai-Polskoye. Here, the advance was about 2 kilometers, and combined with the breakthrough in the northern sector, this gives us a total area of over 40 square kilometers that came under Russian control in the zone of responsibility of just one group in a single day. I can't help but ask a rhetorical question. Well, did they stop Vostok? Because for the last 2 weeks, while Syrsky's offensive was underway, all I heard were confident statements that that was it. The Vostok Group was stopped, its plans to reach Zaporozhye were thwarted, and in general, the Russian army is now solely engaged in defense. As we see today, nothing of the sort. The grouping has not only not been stopped, it continues to move strictly according to the intended plan, and the main strategic goal, reaching Zaporozhye, remains on the agenda. As for Sursky's offensive itself, it continues on a daily basis. The assaults come in waves. Just over the past 24 hours, 19 units of Ukrainian equipment were destroyed. 19. This is a very serious number, even for one day of active combat operations. The personnel losses of the Ukrainian armed forces during these attacks are also significant. Speaking objectively, the Ukrainian armed forces do have certain local successes as a result of their offensive. Data continues to come in, and in one of our upcoming episodes, we will definitely analyze them in detail. But if we talk about the strategic dimension, the goal has not been achieved. They did not stop the Vostok group. They failed to force it into a defensive mode. Locally, perhaps a partial success. Strategically, no. Dobropoli direction, the center group expands control. Moving on to the next sector. Good news also came yesterday from the Dobropoli direction. We touched on it briefly in the day before yesterday's episode. Now let's go into more detail. There is no progress near Popovka yet. Heavy grinding battles continue there, which do not imply quick results. This is positional work that takes time and resources. However, the units of the center group managed to significantly expand the zone of control east of Novopavlovka. The parameters of the advance are as follows. The width of the sector is more than 5.5 kilometers. The depth is 2.5 kilometers. This is a solid result, considering the nature of the terrain and the density of the defense in this direction. In addition, north of Rusin Yar, Russian units also moved forward, completing the pressure on the quarry and reaching the road leading to Dolgaya Balka. Why is this important? Because the vector of movement here is directed toward the Orekhov, Nikolai Poliye, Dolgaya Balka line. And this line is the main line of the western defense of Konstantinovka, which the Ukrainian armed forces have been creating and fortifying for a long time. If Russian troops reach this line, Konstantinovka will find itself in an extremely difficult position. Frankly speaking, from an operational point of view, its fate is already sealed. It's only a matter of time. But reaching this line will mean the countdown will go from months to weeks, and under a certain confluence of circumstances, possibly even to days. An additional effect, reaching this line creates direct pressure on Druzhkovka from the southern direction. This is already the next level of operational pressure. In general, what is happening now in the Dobropoli direction is that very preparatory rough work that I spoke about a few weeks ago when discussing the prospects of the spring-summer campaign. One of the key tasks for this period is the capture of Konstantinovka, and all that work on enveloping the flanks and destroying defensive lines that is underway now will ultimately lead to the Ukrainian defense in the city collapsing relatively quickly, without the need to get involved in long and bloody urban battles. Although urban combat is already underway in Konstantinovka, just not highly intensive. The tactics used here are not the same as those deployed in Toretsk, Bakhmut or Chasov Yar. There, large-scale assaults took place using heavy equipment and significant infantry forces. In Konstantinovka, they are acting differently, according to the scheme that was perfected during the capture of Pokrovsk, Pervomaisk, and Seversk. Small infantry groups enter, consolidate their positions, and methodically, step by step, expand the zone of control. It is slower, but much more economical in terms of casualties. Shifts have also been recorded inside the city over the past 24 hours. In the eastern part of Konstantinovka, near the city cemetery, the advance amounted to 900 meters. A forest tract was cleared, and the zone of control was somewhat expanded in the private residential sector. There is, however, one sector that personally worries me. I have already mentioned this in previous episodes. For sustained and stable pressure on Konstantinovka, it is necessary to crack the fortified node north of the city. So far, there is no progress west of Chasov Yar. They have not been able to break through this defense yet. This is a constraining factor that needs to be paid attention to. Slavyansk, Kramatorsk direction. Here, events are unfolding following the recent capture of Nikiforovka and Lipovka. The Russian armed forces are not stopping and continue the offensive, fighting their way forward. The area of the new advance over the past 24 hours is up to 2 square kilometers. The northeastern envelopment of Fyodorovka Vitoraya is developing. This is the standard tactic of sequential envelopment, which the Russian army applies in a number of sectors of the front with good results. There are successes north of Reznikovka. According to the latest incoming data, the Ukrainian armed forces have begun withdrawing directly from the village itself. The zone of control has been increased by a kilometer on the Reznikovka-Zakotnoye line. South of Ozernoye, Russian troops reached the Seversky Donets River, which in itself is a tactically significant achievement. An active assault on Krivaya Luka is underway. The situation there is developing as follows. Russian units have destroyed the crossings, thereby blocking the northern approaches to the village. Simultaneously, opportunities for a breakthrough from the southern direction are being probed. From the east, groups have already entered the village, entrenched themselves, and are fighting in the central part of the settlement. Taken together, this indicates a gradual but systematic squeezing of the Krivaya Luka defense. Sumy direction, security zone under pressure. Video materials and reports are coming in from the Sumy direction. A video was received from the settlement of Pokrovsk. This is an important point in the Sumy direction for the control of which positional battles are taking place. Russian sources report the following. In the Sumy security zone, the Russian armed forces increased the zone of control in Pokrovsk by 400 meters, taking up new positions in the northern part of the residential area. At the same time, the forward positions are still under fire from the Ukrainian armed forces. The situation is tense, but manageable. Another supplementary confirming video was received, recording the presence of Russian units at various points in Pokrovsk, including footage of the planting of Russian Federation flags, confirming solid control. An attack by Ukrainian armed forces FPV drone crews on Russian fighters was also recorded. As of today, the map here has not changed. However, it is reported that Russian troops are expanding their zone of control to the south of Pokrovsk. Perhaps in the next 24 hours, tomorrow or the day after, this sector will receive the corresponding coloring on the map in favor of the Russian army. Let me remind you of the timeline. Just yesterday, Russian troops advanced in one combat contact sector and pushed back the Ukrainian armed forces in another. Previously, all this territory was under the control of Ukrainian forces. Now the balance is shifting. Reports are also coming in from Kharkovka, Komarovka, Belaya Beryoza, and Sidorovka. Data from all four settlements indicates an expansion of the Russian troops' zone of control in the Sumy security zone. This is the Glukov direction, named after the city of Glukov, which is located nearby. Let me note in passing that some sources mistakenly called this the Chernigov direction, but we are talking about the Sumy region, and the correct name is Glukov. No further significant advance has been recorded yet, but the systematic expansion of the zone of control continues here. Results of the day, February record, summing up the past 24 hours. 2 settlements and 56.5 square kilometers of territory came under the control of the Russian army. This is the best result for the whole of February, and one of the highest figures recently overall. In 3 days we will be summarizing the results of the month, but it is already safe to say, February of this year significantly surpasses February of the previous year in terms of the pace of advance and the volume of territory taken under control. At the same time, there is one nuance that cannot be ignored. The Ukrainian armed forces can also boast of certain successes this February. By the standards of their own situation, the indicators are not bad. So February leaves a dual impression. On the one hand, a convincing advance by the Russian army. On the other, the activity of Ukrainian forces, which has not dropped to zero. We will analyze this in detail on March 1st, when we sum up the full results of the month. Political agenda: Europe, Hungary, and the American economic divide. Now we move on to the political part, which is also quite action-packed today. The American New York Times publishes an article permeated with undisguised gloom. The publication writes that the European Union planned to demonstrate massive support for Ukraine on the 4th anniversary of the start of the conflict, especially since American efforts to resolve the situation have not yet brought visible results. However, these plans were practically torpedoed by Hungary. Budapest announced its intention to block the next package of sanctions against Russia, as well as to delay the adoption of the already agreed-upon financial assistance package for Ukraine. The sanctions package, according to sources, may still be adopted in an altered form. Officials and diplomats hope that the delay with the aid package is temporary and not a final derailment. Nevertheless, this episode clearly demonstrated how vulnerable the European decision-making mechanism, based on the consensus of all 27 member states, is. One country is capable of blocking a decision supported by everyone else. And this is a systemic problem of the European architecture that manifests itself time and time again. The British Times is forced to acknowledge the reality of the frontline situation. In an article timed to the 4th anniversary of the start of hostilities, the publication notes, "Over the past few months, the Russian army has been continuously advancing westward and, apparently, is preparing to take control of the key defensive nodes of the Ukrainian forces. Primarily, this concerns the fortress cities in the vicinity of Donetsk, Konstantinovka, Kramatorsk, Slavyansk. But Moscow, according to British authors, plans to develop an offensive in the Zaporozhye direction in parallel." Western military analysts cited by the publication admit that the Ukrainian armed forces, including those stationed in Seversk and Liman, are inferior to the Russian army both in terms of personnel numbers and the amount of military equipment. The British write without joy, but they write honestly. Iran and China, a new dimension of military cooperation. According to Reuters, Iran and China are in the final stages of negotiations regarding the supply of Chinese-made CM-302 supersonic anti-ship missiles to Tehran. The range of these missiles reaches 290 kilometers, making them a serious weapon in the Persian Gulf and adjacent waters. The contract, according to agency sources, is practically agreed upon, although the exact timeline for the physical transfer of weapons has not yet been determined. The main competitive advantage of the CM-302 is its ability to overcome naval anti-aircraft defense systems through a combination of low flight altitude and high cruising speed. Weapons experts interviewed by Reuters emphasize, acquiring these missiles will exponentially increase Iran's strike potential and create fundamentally new threats for U.S. Navy ships operating in the region. Trump's tariff policy, the first serious glitches. Republicans in Congress enthusiastically welcomed the Supreme Court's decision, which significantly limited the effect of a whole range of Trump's tariff measures. The most consistent critic of the White House's protectionist course is Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, known as a libertarian and a principled supporter of free trade. He regarded the court's decision as saving the American Republic from the threat of executive tyranny. Senator Paul's logic is as follows. If today Trump, having declared a state of emergency, imposes tariffs bypassing Congress, then tomorrow any left-wing president will be able to use this precedent to carry out a radical economic restructuring. The court set limits that will work in the future under any president. From now on, the White House is forced to impose tariffs in other, more limited ways. In particular, the announced 15% tariffs will be in effect for only 150 days. And could be annulled right on the eve of the midterm congressional elections. Republicans hope this will allow them to somewhat improve their electoral positions. According to polls, 2/3 of Americans view Trump's tariffs negatively, and Democrats are actively peddling every case of rising consumer prices and company bankruptcies associated with the trade war. And here it is appropriate to recall that the economic results of the first year of Trump's second presidency turned out to be far from what was promised. The election program was built around the 3 threes concept. 3% annual economic growth, reducing the budget deficit to 3% of GDP, and increasing oil production by 3 million barrels per day. A year later, none of these targets have been met. U.S. economic growth in 2025 was the lowest in 9 years, since 2016, excluding the collapse during the pandemic period. Even more modest growth is forecast for 2026, in the range of 1.5%. Unemployment is rising, reaching multi-year highs of 5% in certain quarters. Many American importers are suffering heavy losses or going completely bankrupt under the pressure of the tariff effect. In parallel, the bursting of the artificial intelligence bubble is beginning to take its toll. Companies are rapidly cutting entry-level jobs under the pretext of automation. Oil production, contrary to promises, is declining. The depletion of major shale deposits is having an effect. The state budget deficit remains at a record high, reaching 7% of GDP. According to analysts, the debt problem is one of the key risks for the US economy in the short term. The second most significant risk is the possible sharp bursting of the AI bubble, which until recently was the main engine of growth. Other countries, it seems, are already beginning to prepare to conduct trade negotiations directly with presidential candidates, bypassing the current trade representatives of the administration. After the midterm elections in December, the presidential race will kick off, and the main candidates will certainly compete, among other things, on the field of promises to normalize trade policy and return predictability to international economic relations. Trump is left hoping to make it to the midterm elections without additional economic shocks. Otherwise, the consequences for the Republican Party in Congress threaten to be highly painful. That's all for today. Don't forget to subscribe, leave comments, and share the episodes. See you tomorrow.